Hello, spoilers, blah blah Devil May Cry title of the video, let's dive in. Devil May Cry 3 introduced a hidden mechanic so powerful that it would end up defining both Dante and Vergil's playstyle to a large extent, especially, or exclusively, when it came to the harder difficulties. This mechanic is of course DT Explosion. Here's how it works. Normally, when you have at least 3 notches of DT, you press L1 to enter Devil Trigger and you get all the benefits of your demon form. Faster movement, higher offense, higher defense, and health regen until the resource runs out. You start the game with 3 notches of DT, but by finding and buying purple orbs, you can bring your maximum up to 10. However, as soon as you exceed 3, you've unwittingly unlocked DT Explosion. It isn't explained, but DT actually activates when you release L1 rather than when you press it, meaning you can hold down the button for a delayed release. But something happens while you're holding down the button. You'll notice that each additional notch of DT will start glowing red, one after the other, and will stop once all 7 additional notches are red. As soon as a single notch is primed, you've set up a DT Explosion, and priming more notches will just increase its power. Once you release L1, Explosion. All primed notches are immediately spent and you're left in your demon form with 3 notches of DT left. You might think that that sounds pretty wasteful. You're forgoing 7 notches, 11 seconds of healing, nigh invulnerability, and increased speed and damage for a single attack. Yeah, but look at it. This is Dante and Vergil's strongest attack, besides maybe a DT just released, but even that attack doesn't have the area of effect nor flexibility of DTE. That's what I'm calling it now, by the way, DTE Devil Trigger Explosion. Yeah. A fully charged DTE will basically kill every enemy around you unless they're particularly tanky, and will immediately raise your style meter to SSS if it hits enough enemies. In many cases, especially on harder difficulties, it's worth the trade-off. A well-placed DTE will net you more style and damage than you would have gotten if you had merely used DT normally and played as well as you could have, and it will get you those results a lot faster. The speed component cannot be overlooked because your completion speed factors into your final grade, and this can be a tricky category to fulfill on the hardest difficulty, DMD, or Dante Must Die. In DMD, enemies have the ability to activate DT as well, which multiplies their remaining health bar by, I don't fucking know, but this is insane. They activate their Devil Trigger if they see too many of their friends get murdered by you. So on this difficulty, it's advised to spread out your damage before dealing the finishing blow to anyone. However, another factor that can cause an enemy to activate DT is time. If an enemy exists too long on this difficulty, they will inevitably enter DT, leaving you with a bit of a conundrum. You shouldn't kill anyone too quickly, you should space out your damage so enemies won't have nearly as much health when they enter DT, but you can't take too long or they'll enter DT anyway. What could you possibly do? DT Explosion. DT Explosion is the best way to contend with these mechanics because of its AoE. You can spend some time whittling down the enemies, gaining a bit of style and DT, then finish everything in the vicinity off immediately with a DTE. No one gets to activate DT, they technically never saw their friends get murdered because they died at the same time. And of course, you end the encounter with SSS and get to reap the benefits. Thanks, I'll put it with the others. DTE has some more uses outside these cases too. It will jack up your style immediately so you can use it to get up to SSS with ease, and then you can continue playing normally to maintain that style. You can use it to deal a lot of damage to a single enemy, very useful in boss fights. A DTE will actually all but cancel Vergil's DT if you can land one. All you need to do is hit him one more time to get him out of it. It doesn't even need to be fully charged. Game changer. Trust me. But my favorite use leverages a very unique aspect of the attack to your advantage. DTE can be activated at any time. You can be in the middle of any attack animation and layer DTE on top, and this has a ton of potential utility. Personally, I use it whilst engaged in long attack animations that I want to maintain. Trying to do a dance macabre, but some cheeky shit walks in from off screen to interrupt you? Almost done charging a rising dragon on Leviathan Heart, but the audience is out to heckle you? Pop a DTE. Even if you've only primed a couple notches, the explosion will at least stagger the weaker enemies around you, and you can follow through with whatever you're doing. Unless the explosion kills them first. As you can see, the incentive to use this ability is very strong. However, it's not as simple as pressing a button. You need to hold that button. It's far more complicated. To be precise, you need to hold the button for 11 seconds if you want to charge all 7 notches, and more often than not, it's preferable to charge all 7 if you have them because it will take quite a while to build up that amount of DT again. So, may as well get as much as you can out of each explosion. 11 seconds is worth quite a lot in this game though. To go back to the Danse Macabre example, you can't wait until the enemy readies their attack to interrupt you. You need DTE primed in advance. In all of the cases I mentioned, you want DTE primed in advance, and that introduces a... Is it too dramatic to call it a paradigm shift? Well, whatever, paradigm shift. L1 will go from a button that you tapped only in emergencies or when you really wanted to deal damage to a button you are constantly holding down and only release in emergencies or when you want to deal damage. You never know when a DTE might come in clutch, so the best course of action is to hold L1 constantly and prime each notch of DT as you earn it. It may seem small, but I really can't overstate how significant this change actually feels. Not only is your relationship with L1 flipped on its head, but new dynamics arise to challenge you. That is, you better not let go of that button. Devil Trigger is not particularly cheap. Royal Guard! Swordmaster's more fun, shut up. Unless you're playing Royal Guard, DT is not cheap, so there is a lot riding on your ability to time DTE correctly. If you release it at an inopportune moment, you just lost all your DT, and it'll be quite a while before you earn it back. In gameplay, this can get pretty stressful, but that's only one half of it. When you've primed all 7 notches, now there's a lot of pressure to release L1 as soon as possible, or you're wasting time you could be spending earning more DT and readying up the next explosion. That's stress. I've tried to find another analogy, but none fit quite so well, so please excuse my crudeness. Children in the room, you're weak and small and go away. Adults, playing with DTE is like having sex. More specifically, it's like trying your damnedest not to blow your load too early. Sorry ladies, Devil May Cry is for boys. Yeah. In high stakes situations, you will start sweating. Should I pop DTE? No, too far away, I need to wait. Oh, but I should get this damage off. This fight will just keep going on otherwise. No, it's too soon, the time's not right. No, fuck it, now, no! Oh no, This never happens. Again, I can't understate how severely this mechanic changes the game. I, for one, have replaced my sex life with Devil May Cry, and I find it crazy that it's so hidden. The game never tells you this. YouTube tells you this. Maybe the manual told you this, but I don't read. There is one more mechanical aspect of DTE to go over, and that is canceling it. As I said, a DTE will trump whatever you will be able to do offensively in Devil Trigger, and in many cases a good offense will make for a good defense. But not all of the time. Sometimes, Virgil's bullshit attack, going into DT for 11 seconds would be preferable to mitigate damage and make evasion easier. So what are you supposed to do? Unfortunately, once you have primed a notch of DT, it's best to consider that notch is already spent. There is nothing you can do. Well, there is that one thing. But I personally consider there to be no greater shame in DMC than resorting to this. And I think the game is on my side here because the mere act of canceling DTE requires you to go against everything the game stands for. You have to pause. If you pause the game and release L1, you can regain your primed DT notches. Was it worth it? This is the game calling you out. There's no other way to put it. You must break immersion to do this. You must circumvent the game itself, and it just feels bad, man. For a game where the objective is to look cool while fighting, there is no greater L than admitting you can't look cool, than pausing the fight. Now don't get me wrong, I've done it. Video on my other channel, I needed to beat Vergil on DMD for the first time, but we both know that ideally, I would not have needed to resort to that. That footage is irreparably marred by pauses. You can't even cut them out because you'd notice the cuts in the music. And as such, that video remains a testament to my inadequacy at the time. My brother in Christ, I pulled out abruptly. The game does throw you a couple bones, but none that will really be of use to you. Cutscenes and room transitions will automatically reset your primed DT notches. Not useful at all in combat where it matters, but nice you don't have to keep it held indefinitely when you're like platforming or whatever. So yes, for all intents and purposes, there is no canceling DTE.
In this world, you can either do things the easy way or the right way.
So that's the breakdown. I think DTE is a great idea. I really like the tension it adds to gameplay. It adds a whole new element of resource management to engage with once you've got basic combat down pat. That's good. But what I'm not crazy about is that it somewhat reduces gameplay to a single attack. DMC is a game about variety and efficiency. It's not just about playing well, but intentionally varying up your methodology for the sake of style, whilst ideally not sacrificing efficiency. Now that DTE is in the mix, those various methods and tactics become a means to building DT to use DTE so you can get the real damage off, rather than being the end themselves. I'm being a bit hyperbolic, the rest of your tools aren't useless outside building DT, but they do feel undermined somewhat when this one move so severely dwarfs them in terms of damage, and does so in an instant. That's without mentioning that it undermines DT as well. It is better in the vast majority of scenarios to forego extended access to your demon form to perform a DT explosion. Why exactly does that suck? Because your demon form is really fun to play in. You move faster, hit harder, can't be staggered as easily. It enhances all of the mechanics you're having fun engaging with, and not being able to avail of those enhancements means cutting out so much variety in gameplay in lieu of a single attack. Ultimately, you do get some time in DT regardless. A DTE will always leave you with 3 notches, but that's not much, and anyway, you're incentivized to revert as soon as possible to start readying the next explosion. There's also the issue that the attack in question just isn't very interesting. It's just very effective. It can do a lot of damage and it knocks back enemies, but it can't launch them, it can't juggle, it can't parry, it can't break guards, it can't block projectiles, it doesn't give you any iframes. Not that it should do all of those things, but giving it any properties besides damage and knockback would add more variety to how you use it, because as it stands, its use case is even more limited than that of a basic sword swing. Finally, there's the issue of how the attack looks. It's called an explosion, but the word explosion is a bit too flashy for what it actually is. To the untrained eye, it may not even register as an attack, especially if you know what activating DT looks like. You can use DTE in flashy ways, you can use it while taunting and that looks dope, you can time it to one of your attacks to make it seem like your punch is what actually did all that damage, you can do this. But on its own, it's just not very impactful looking. So overall, not huge issues, but definitely some things worth noting. Now, what does DTE tell us about Dante and Vergil's character? DMC3 is the first game chronologically, and in it we see young Dante awaken his devil trigger for the first time. We're not sure how long Vergil has had access to DT, but I'd wager he's still somewhat new to it because he's still pretty young. They're both like 19 in this game, I think. It's important to note that neither character can use DTE post DMC3, so I interpret it mainly as a result of inexperience. DTE seems like a very crude way of channeling demon energy, as opposed to entering devil trigger or creating summon sword formations. To support this angle of inexperience, we can see in the game that they even have trouble maintaining their demon mode. See, notice this like glitchy effect? And there's also the fact that their demon modes are still dependent on their devil arms, implying that they are in part channeling the power of their weapons to achieve this state in the first place. Although they possess demonic power, they have yet to figure out how to control it or channel it efficiently. As such, I can see DTE as the most interesting thing Vergil and Dante can think to do with DT at the time. Just unload all of it at once. I can also see it as a result of immaturity. A kid's idea of cool or impressive. Just the biggest thing I can do. I think it's interesting that although DTE works identically for both brothers in terms of mechanics, their character makes me view their use of it very differently. I could see Dante putting all his energy into this attack as a way to devalue his demonhood. This stuff is worthless to me. I don't need to use this energy economically or artfully. At this point in the story, Dante is still yet to fully accept his demonic half. He doesn't even admit to having a father, so I can see him treating his DT as such. I can see Vergil, on the other hand, using this attack as if to say, this stuff is cheap to me. I have so much money, it doesn't matter if I waste it here or there. That's right, look at how rich I am. Vergil at this point in the story is obsessed with his demonic half. He values it far more than his human half. The resulting mechanic is identical, but the processes for both these two characters are completely inverse, or at least you could read it as such. And, as we see in every game since, it's a habit both brothers grow out of. Presumably, they've matured, and they've learned to channel their DT more efficiently. I was going to point out how 7 notches of Devil Trigger will last almost twice as long in the subsequent games in the chronology, but for some reason this isn't true of DMC4, so I guess I'll go fuck myself. Speaking of DMC4, I will say, coming off the heels of 3 and going right into 4, DTE is sorely missed. The extra resource management element is gone, and it feels like a whole dimension of gameplay is absent. L1 is no longer a button you constantly hold, and once you got used to it, that felt like a key aspect of the gameplay. It's hard to overwrite that muscle memory. I've got a nice little headcanon though, that DTE in 4 is replaced with distortion, because it works into my interpretation of DTE being a sign of inexperience and not knowing how to artfully channel Devil Trigger. Distortion, for the uninitiated, is a bug in DMC4's programming. If Dante entered or exited DT at the moment an attack landed, the game would count the damage as being applied twice, and as such, a distorted version of Dante's strongest attacks are by far his most powerful moves. Although distortion is not intentional on the developer's part, it's in the game and is free to be interpreted. I see it as Dante using DT in a much more mature, artful, and economic way. Whereas DTE was him using as much DT as possible to let out a strong attack, distortion is Dante using as little DT as possible to achieve a similar result. I think it's neat, but nonetheless, DTE itself is absent, and L1 goes from girlfriend to booty call. You just tap that every once in a while, you never hold her. Or I should say, DTE is absent for Dante, because Nero actually has it, although it works very differently for him. Nero's DTE happens automatically whenever he activates Devil Trigger. It's this blue orb that you see around him. It's not nearly as powerful as Dante and Vergil's in 3, but it's arguably more key to Nero's playstyle than it was to theirs. In fact, DTE is arguably the most useful component of Nero's Devil Trigger. Frequently, you will pop DT just for the explosion's effect. So, what does it do? Well, first and foremost, it is an AoE attack. It doesn't do much damage and doesn't have much range, but if you're surrounded by enemies, it will give you a good deal of breathing room. Whereas Dante and Vergil's DTE merely staggered enemies if it didn't kill them, Nero's launches them, which gives you much more downtime as the enemies recover. It's also a way to open a lot of enemies up for a buster, Nero's main mechanic. There are a range of enemies that can dodge or block a buster by default, but launching them into the air will open them up immediately, including Alphonse Elric over here.
It would have been nice to at least have had a girlfriend before I...
However, the true power of Nero's DTE lies in the iframes. Popping DT, and consequently DTE, will give Nero about 1.5 seconds of invulnerability. Attacks will just go through you, and this is so goddamn useful. This is why you pop DT just for the explosion, why you deactivate DT soon after to conserve the resource. It's always advantageous to be sitting on enough DT to use the explosion if you get yourself in a sticky situation, if you find an attack particularly tricky to dodge, if you mistime a dodge, or if you commit to a lengthy attack animation at an inopportune moment. That brings me to the next property of DTE. It is a cancel, an almost everything cancel. Excluding buster animations, DTE takes priority over every action in the game. Regardless of what you might be doing at the time, even getting knocked back from an attack, you can instantly regain your composure by popping DT. I think I prefer Nero's DTE to Dante's and Vergil's in 3. It's a much more versatile tool. It is no longer an end the rest of the combat serves as the means for, rather it is a means to continue combat, another tool to be used in a variety of useful ways. It's still on you to do the heavy lifting, to actually deal the damage through other means, but this card up your sleeve helps you achieve that. I find it much more in line with the spirit of the series than an insta-nuke. However, I do find that DTE feels less special here, and I think that's a consequence of it being something you do incidentally. It is no longer hidden tech, a late game secret that recontextualizes the mechanics and adds a new dimension of resource management and tension. It is just the base game. It does involve an element of resource management. It incentivizes you to deactivate DT sooner rather than later so you can reactivate it sooner, but that's true of Devil Trigger in every game for every character. It's the exact same incentive structure, the incentive is just stronger here. Small gripes aside, I really like that Nero has DTE and that his is distinct. It tells us about his character, especially when you compare it to DTE in 3. The fact that this boy uses DTE every time he activates Devil Trigger tells me one of a few things depending on how you interpret it. Since DTE is an incidental mechanic, it's up in the air as to whether or not he's doing it intentionally. Is his demonic side just so powerful that this happens whenever he transforms? Or is Nero putting an extra kick into his transformations on purpose? Either read is supported, and I'd go with a bit of column A and a bit of column B, but I'm definitely more drawn to column B due to how DTE worked in 3. It was something you opted into. It's not as easy as simply transforming. And remember, Nero here has as much experience as Dante in 3 did with Devil Trigger. Actually, he has more. Half a day more, but more. I see Nero's DTE as a consequence of Nero trying really hard to prove himself, to assert his power and have it be recognized. I go into a lot more detail about Nero's character in my previous video, but to summarize, he has an inferiority complex when it comes to Dante. He's less experienced, so he goes above and beyond to prove otherwise, and he does so usually by trying to compensate for his lack of experience with raw power. I think this ties in quite nicely to how DTE functions mechanically. It's a move you use almost exclusively because you're in a bad spot. You're surrounded, you're about to get hit, you can't buster this enemy otherwise. It's a testament to both his inexperience and how hard he tries to overcome it. It's a move that the ideal Devil Hunter would never need to use, but Nero does need it because he isn't there yet. He's going to get hit, he's going to have trouble landing a buster on Alphonse, but what he's lacking in experience he makes up for with sheer power. Your attack didn't hit me because I didn't want it to. I didn't dodge it, I didn't parry it, I just... And the result is the same. Nero's DTE also incentivizes the player to play in a way that supports Nero's inexperience and eagerness. Knowing that you have an emergency safety button gives you license to take more risks. This is likely going to get you into trouble that you then need to press your emergency button to get out of. The result is a character who throws themselves headfirst into danger, bites off more than they can chew, but still comes out on top through sheer fucking will. Now, you might be thinking that Nero too will grow out of DTE, as Dante and Vergil did, that it's merely a sign of inexperience and immaturity. So in DMC5, Nero does not grow out of DTE, however, he does seem to gain more control of it. If you tilt the left analog stick when you enter Devil Trigger, it will actually cancel DTE. If you've played, you've probably noticed that DTE doesn't happen when you're walking, and this is why. But you might not have known, I didn't until recording footage for this video, that you can do this during any animation, as long as you're tilting the left stick. If you don't want Nero's attack to be cancelled, but you want to go into Devil Trigger, you can do that. The game tells you nothing about this, it just expects you to find it out, kind of like the original DTE from 3. But here, there's been an inversion. Here, the secret is how to contain your power. And it is an interesting secret. This is quite an odd ability, because I'd say it's still preferable to pop DTE most of the time. It comes with a lot of benefits as we've gone over, but this secret mechanic with a more demanding input only has one benefit. It won't interrupt your animations. And given that's the only benefit, you'd mostly be using this whilst inputting other attacks, making the input that much more demanding. In DMC5, you press the D-pad to enter DT with Nero. So to cancel DTE, you need to be tilting the left joystick when you press the pad, which is also on the left side of the controller, while you're inputting other attacks that may call for you to be tilting the joystick away from the D-pad, or not tilting it at all. It is awkward and finicky, and all this to cancel an explosion you're probably better off using. Mechanically, it's a bit of a piss take, but I think that's the point. It implies that suppressing DTE takes more effort for Nero than just using it. This brings us back to columns A and B in terms of what you think this means. A holds that the reason Nero performs DTE every time he enters Devil Trigger is because his demonic side is so powerful that it just happens. So, although now he's figured out how to suppress it, it takes more effort than not. But I think you could also read it in terms of column B, as Nero going against his compulsion. Perhaps using DTE is easier for Nero simply because that's what he as a character has preference for. He likes, wants, and is used to putting 110% into every attack he does, so it actually takes more effort for him to hold back. Either way, you can take away that Nero has gained a modicum of control over his demon form, and I really do like how they've portrayed that here. Not only how they've leveraged the input, but also the fact that this mechanic is a secret, one that I've just now discovered. Jesus. Vergil also has DTE in DMC5. In fact, he has two, and to avoid confusion, I'll call the first one SDTE. No, that's gonna be confusing. I'll call the first one Boom Boom and the second one Summon Clone, because that's what it's called. You make Boom Boom automatically by entering Sin Devil Trigger. SDT is the new resource added for DMC5. You channel regular DT into it, and then you hold L1 to activate it. Hey, we're holding L1 again. Boom Boom is a little stronger than Nero's DTE, a whole 14% stronger, and similarly launches the enemies around him. Boom Boom's range seems to be a bit larger than DTE, although that could just be my impression because of the animation. However, on the whole, it has far less utility than Nero's explosion. Although Boom Boom also provides iframes, it has no animation priority. That means that to trigger it, you need to be standing still or he'll just transform normally. Although it should be noted that teleporting with air trick or falling counts as standing still as long as you're not tilting the left stick. As such, it can't be used as an emergency button as readily. It can't save you if you've already committed to an action. Like the original DTE from 3, this is basically just an AoE attack, but you can't layer it on top of what you're doing. You need to make time to pull it off. A unique property of Boom Boom though is the fact that you can basically spam it ad infinitum. Unlike with DT, Vergil doesn't spend SDT immediately upon activation. He can revert to his human form before any of the resources expended, meaning he can use it again and again and again with no cost. Summon Clone, on the other hand, is literally just a copy of Nero's DTE. Imagine Vergil taking something important from his own son.
Can you believe that?
It happens automatically when you summon your clone, which for Vergil in 5 is analogous to activating DT, and it launches enemies close to you, does the same damage as Nero's, provides the same amount of iframes, and is also a nearly everything cancel. It has animation priority over most things, so it can be used as an emergency button. I'm not crazy about Vergil's DTEs in 5. They're fine, I just don't avail of them that much. I rarely choose to make Boom Boom, it's just a thing that happens sometimes when I go into SDT. And I similarly rarely use Summon Clone for any other reason than to summon my clone. Remember, I said that Nero's DTE is something that the ideal Devil Hunter would never need to use, and you want to talk about ideal, Vergil is a nigh untouchable powerhouse. I don't need this emergency button. I've already got like 4 of those. I can block, for fuck's sake. But isn't that what 5's all about? Vergil's whole story up until 5 has been about being traumatized as a child, internalizing that he can never rely on anyone but himself, that no one will protect him, and becoming consumed by a quest for power to ensure he never needs anyone else, whatever the cost. He constructs this cold, fearless, unflinching persona that we just have to put up with throughout the series. In 5, he finds that his family is there to protect him, and we see him finally accept the help of others, albeit begrudgingly. Dude, this fight is Nero protecting Vergil by beating the shit out of him. Who wrote this? This is genius. Why aren't more games... Never mind. I see the clone as a mechanical representation of this development. Look, he's learned to rely on... someone else. Jokes aside, the notion that he summoned someone to fight with him is definitely meaningful, regardless of who that person is, but I think the explosion is the more interesting aspect. It's something he learned from his son. The mechanic that I explained underlines Nero's inadequacy is doing the same thing here. Vergil is finally admitting that he isn't perfect. Sometimes he does need help. You may not need to use it often when playing as Vergil, but sometimes you just need a hand. As for what Boom Boom tells us about his character, I think he's just emasculating his son. Again, there is the column A and B issue, where we can't be certain whether Boom Boom is something that happens incidentally, so whenever it doesn't happen, it's because Vergil is suppressing it, or if it's intentional, so it isn't significant at all when it doesn't happen. I don't think there's much to say about column B, but if we run with column A, Boom Boom implies Vergil is much more in control of his demonic power than Nero, which checks out. It will never overwhelm him and interrupt what he's doing. If he's mid-combo, he'll merely transform and continue the combo. You could see this as something Nero may strive towards. In the future, when he's gained more control, he too will flit in and out of Devil Trigger uninterrupted with ease. But this may be a misread. Perhaps suppressing DTE is preferable specifically for Vergil. I say this because there are other aspects of his mechanics that incentivize being uninterrupted. Namely, when you perform an attack with Yamato, you gain DT if you let the cooldown animation play out. There are no examples of analogous incentives for any of the other characters, taunts excluded obviously, so this is a particularly Vergil incentive. He prefers to let his animations play out. He does not want to be interrupted or made to look like he isn't in control, that he isn't doing exactly what he intends to, and that it isn't having the exact effect he intended. All this to say that Vergil values his composure above raw power. Yes, he needs power to maintain his composure, but what's the point of being all-powerful if you're not going to use it to emasculate yourself, embody your idealized image of yourself? The other point of note is Boom Boom's cost. Once you have a full bar of SDT, it's essentially free and you can spam it as much as you want. I think you might be able to interpret this as Vergil being based. I think I'm done with the Vergil segment. And now for Dante. Oh, Dante, you really are Mummy's favorite, aren't you? Dante only has one DTE, but he has something else that acts as a proper evolution of the initial concept, and it is so spicy. Before we get to that, let's talk Dante's DTE, or rather SDTE, or Bam Bam, as I'm going to call it. You make Bam Bam whenever you enter Sin Devil Trigger, and just look at that production. It puts Nero's explosion to shame, he's really milking it. It is a true everything cancel. No exceptions. If you activate SDT, it doesn't matter what you're doing, it takes priority. It gives you almost 5 seconds of iframes, does the same amount of damage as Nero's, although it can't deal a finishing blow, launches the enemies around you, and subjects you to this drawn-out animation. Thanks to the length of the animation, you can't really take advantage of the enemies being launched, it just works to give you some breathing room. It's a cool panic button response, right? Well, it's not that simple. If you see this animation, it means you have committed to entering SDT. Unlike Vergil, when Dante enters SDT, he is stuck in it until the resource runs out. SDT is phenomenally powerful and will likely turn the tide of any battle you're in, but the resource isn't cheap. 1 bar of SDT for Dante is equivalent to 12 notches of Devil Trigger, which is more than the maximum 10 notches that you can have at any one time. You need to drain an entire DT bar and then some to fill SDT, so you're never really triggering it solely for the explosion. The explosion may factor into when you choose to deploy it, but it's not the endpoint. This is the endpoint. Now, you may remember earlier in the video I said 11 seconds is worth quite a lot in this game, and 5 seconds just to transform is no joke. Tougher enemies won't be launched or staggered by the explosion, and you've lost control of the camera, so this DTE actually has quite a lot of drawbacks. When you finally regain control, you could be locked into taking damage from an enemy you're not looking at. That's without saying that this 5-second animation can start to feel a bit excessive and tired when you view it multiple times in mission. Well, there's actually a reason for that. It's a punishment. Quadruple S is the true final form of the DTE introduced in DMC3. It's an ability that allows you to instantly transform into SDT if you have a triple S style ranking at the time. Not only does it remove the transformation animation, but it gives you a few seconds before the bar starts depleting, giving you a small window to transform out of it without spending any of the resource. If you choose to stay in SDT past that window, you're stuck in it until the resource runs out as normal. But that window means that entering SDT through Quadruple S will give you more time in God mode than if you had activated it normally. Normally, SDT lasts you 9 seconds, but with Quadruple S, it lasts 14 seconds. Essentially, you get to actually use the 5 seconds you would otherwise be spending to watch the animation. As such, it is always preferable to enter SDT through Quadruple S, even if you don't plan on deactivating it. This is why I referred to Bam Bam as a punishment. If you're playing well, you'll never see it, regardless of how you use SDT. Bam Bam also works as an indicator that you aren't using Quad S. You may not have noticed your style rank slip, you may not have realized you got hit. Bam Bam signals that you are now stuck in SDT until it runs out. So Bam Bam isn't really the topic of discussion, it's Quadruple S. Quad S is Dante's trump card. Transforming through it is also an everything cancel. No matter what you're doing, you can interrupt it to transform. SDT has ridiculous evasive capabilities. You can jump higher than anything can reach you, you can spam the dodge button and get as many iframes as you want, and you can teleport to another enemy to get out of the way quickly. You won't get the guaranteed safety of Bam Bam, but SDT alone is more than enough to get you out of any trouble you might be in if you use it right. It also has ridiculous offensive capabilities. Sin Inferno will stun or launch everything around you, and you do a ton more damage than Bam Bam. The Loose will keep basically every enemy in the vicinity at bay, while also dealing a ton of damage. All of your attacks will break enemy guards, etc. SDT is so insanely powerful that reaching S could be a serious game changer, even more so than the original DTE in 3. If you use it right. And that's the key. You need to use it. Unlike DTE from DMC3, S is not an end. It is a gateway to more means. You can enter SDT and just fucking die if you want to. The impetus is on you to actually make use of your demon form. It's a tool to be used however you please. You could only use it for dodging and positioning, leaving regular Dante to actually do all the damage. You could use it as frequently as you can and just demolish everything. You could use it just to break enemy guards, just to stun enemies, just for emergencies, just to continue combos, just to get rid of tougher enemies, etc. It all comes down to how you want to utilize it. This, I think, is a perfect evolution of the concept introduced in 3, that is far more in line with the spirit of the franchise. For a game about variety and efficiency, I think it's a perfect decision to have your reward for good gameplay be access to more of both, instead of just efficiency, which is what the original DTE was. Not only that, but SDT doesn't undermine Devil Trigger the way that DTE did. Yes, you need to initially charge SDT by funneling DT into it, but once the bar is full, you never need to do that again. As such, you can use Devil Trigger to its fullest whilst still being able to avail of S. Vast improvement in every way. Now, you may be wondering why S qualifies as a DTE. It's not really an explosion, so why is this at all related? Well, it's about the dynamic it introduces to gameplay. As I said, you need to hold L1 to prime SDT, and when you're flitting in and out of it at a moment's notice, it means you are constantly holding L1, and it feels so similar to how Dante felt in 3. The tension is back, except instead of the tension arising from making sure your explosion landed, the tension is about maintaining style. If your style dips below S, you better not let go of that fucking button, or you're gonna waste all of your SDT. To add insult to injury, you won't be able to enter Devil Trigger to help you get back up to S because the button you'd need to press is occupied. You'll get into incredibly tense scenarios where both devil forms are locked from you and you need to claw your way back to S to finally release the button and get them both back. In times like these, there is no greater euphoria than releasing that button and just... Then again, you could always pause if you want to. That's why I consider S to be an evolution of DTE. It reintroduces a layer of resource management and tension to contend with once you've grown competent enough at the combat. I also think it's brilliant to tie this mechanic to the style meter for a lot of reasons, many of which I go over in my other video. Here, I'll just compare it to the original DTE. The original DTE had requirements to access. Not only did you need to figure out it existed in the first place, but you had to have earned enough red orbs to purchase the additional notches of DT. Fulfilling these conditions implied some level of mastery, but it didn't actually guarantee it. Someone could have told you about DTE. You could be playing on your sibling's save file that already has all the notches of DT. You could circumvent the expectation. In 5, however, the conditions are far more cut and dry. You gotta be dope, simple as that. The condition is more directly connected to the core gameplay and ensures you have the required level of mastery before you can engage with the additional layer of resource management. And what an incentive to do so. Look how cool S is. Doesn't this make you want to get good? Makes me want to get good. As for what S says about Dante's character is intrinsically linked to the core gameplay of the series. Efficiency and variety. Dante is the epitome of both. He's a very efficient demon slayer, and he likes to have fun, so he varies up his methods frequently. SDT is the most powerful state in the franchise, which obviously plays to the efficiency angle, and there is no better way to emphasize the variety aspect than by giving him the only true everything cancel in the series. No longer are you bound by attack animations. You can stop any action at any point to do a different action, which you can again interrupt if you want. Infinite possibilities. I also think there's an important distinction to be made between Quad S and Nero's DTE. The notion that DTE can be used as a cancel was first introduced with Nero's, and I explained how that property played to and incentivized players to play in a way that would support his character. Now, Dante has an emergency button too, and similarly, you are more incentivized to take risks. However, it doesn't speak to Dante's character in the same way for a few reasons. Firstly, unlike with Nero, you need to hold L1 to prime SDT in advance. As such, it is less framed as a panic button response and more so as something Dante was anticipating. Secondly, you need to earn Quad S, whereas Nero just needs 3 notches of DT. He can use his explosion when he's at a disadvantage to claw his way back up to triple S, whereas quadruple S can only be used because you've already achieved top marks without it. Whereas Nero's DTE speaks to his inadequacy and his efforts to overcome it, Dante's speaks to his mastery of combat. I like how the developers took this useful element from Nero's kit and applied it to Dante, because, well, it's useful, but made sure to apply it in a way that speaks to Dante's character more, in a way that distinguishes him from Nero. The last thing I'll touch upon is the progression of Dante's relationship with Devil Trigger. This is founded on my distortion headcanon, but shut up, I'm in charge here and I think this makes sense. In DMC3, DTE was Dante using as much DT as possible to do a lot of damage. In DMC4, distortion was Dante using as little DT as possible to achieve a similar result. In DMC5, Quad S is Dante using no DT at all to achieve the heights of his capabilities. There is a meaningful progression there, showing how Dante has grown more control over his demonic side, to the extent that it's no longer a resource to him. Canon Dante always has a full bar of SDT because he's learned to use his demon form without expending any demonic energy. It's more a part of him now than it ever was. And with that, ends the Sons of Sparta saga. So yeah, I like quadruple S. And that's the evolution of Devil Trigger Explosion throughout the games. I thought I should make this video going over this mechanic since a majority of players probably don't even know the origin of it due to its obscurity and high barrier for entry. Nonetheless, it is one of, if not the most significant ability in the entire series since 3. It defined the highest levels of play by introducing another layer of resource management on top of the standard gameplay, and although this dynamic wasn't carried over to 4, it was reintroduced in 5, better than ever, exclusively as part of Dante's kit. The rest of the characters got their own distinct explosions that fed into their playstyle and told us more about them. It's a mechanic with quite a legacy and has probably gone through the most changes out of any throughout the series. I hope you found this interesting. I had a lot of fun going through these mechanics, and as always, thanks for watching. Before I go, I'm just going to mention a few useful things about SDT. So remember how cutscenes were opportunities for you to let go of L1? Well, in the Vergil fight, he has these little cutscenes when he activates SDT or summons his clone, and you can actually use those as opportunities to let go of L1 in the middle of the fight. This has saved me so many times. Another thing, I think this is a glitch in the game? I'm not really sure. Anyway, you automatically revert from SDT after this encounter in Mission 11 with this guy. I hate this guy. So you can just save him for last, go into SDT, use Demolition, he's gone, and you can transform out of SDT. I was so happy to find this out. I do this almost every time I run the mission. Also, just how I came up with the idea of talking about this, DMC5 is the game that really got me into the series. I've liked DMC since I played 4 as a kid, but I had never gone back for the harder difficulties or went for S ranks or anything. 5 is the game that made me do that. technically the reboot is the one that made me do that, but 5 made it stick. So after I really got into 5, I decided to go through the series and, do the thing right. And when I was playing 3, I had learned about DT Explosion and I was using it, but it wasn't until the Vergil fight at the end when I realized, oh crap, he's gonna do his wombo combo and I've primed all my notches. Is there a cancel for this? And I knew you could pause and undo priming SDT in DMC5. So in that moment, I was like, does that work here? So I paused and lo and behold, yes, it does work. And that's when it clicked. That, oh my god, I've been holding L1 this whole time. This is just like DMC5. This is where that comes from, huh? That's what made me make the connection, the ability to cancel by pausing. And really, the holding L1, it really does feel like an intrinsic part of Dante now. I feel pretty uncomfortable playing him in DMC4 because I'm not holding, well, in fact, I will be holding L1 and I'll realize that I'm not supposed to be doing that here. Yeah, so it's a really cool thing that they developed it. It was a pretty small feature in 3, but when you start using it, like, I called it a paradigm shift for a reason. You start holding L1 most of the time you're playing, and I think it's really cool that they took this otherwise little element and evidently understood how significantly it affected gameplay and thus reintroduced it in 5 and made it like the thing, And it is quadruple S, it's SDT, it's the best thing Dante can do. I just thought it was an interesting line to trace from 5 back to 3. Anyway, thanks again for watching. You'll probably never hear any special orders without hearing Billie Eilish from now on, and that is a burden I have carried for a while, and now I have shared it with you. Have a good one.